Hi, this is Leo Lopez for TEA. Today I'm going to be going over the first webinar in many, a series for House Bill 3. This is HB 3 and 30, and today we're going to talk about teacher compensation. So again, my name is Leo Lopez. I'm the Associate Commissioner for School Finance. I do want to call out my staff to help me out with this presentation. David Marks, Director of Financial Compliance, Al McKenzie, Director of Forecasting and Fiscal Analysis, and Amy Copeland, Assistant Director of State Funding. Today, we're going to cover three major topics which have been districts have been asking about over the last several weeks. The minimum salary schedule. We're going to talk about the calculation of the 30% requirement for compensation increases in House Bill 3, and then we're also going to go over some examples and scenarios. So the first thing I want to talk about is the minimum salary schedule increase, as well as the implications for TRS contributions for teachers and other minimum salary schedule staff. So House Bill 3 increased the basic allotment from $5,140 to $6,160. Now, in statute, the BA or the minimum salary schedule is linked to the BA. So every time the basic allotment increases, so does the minimum salary schedule. Now, one of the things we've been getting a lot of questions on is whether or not these increases are mandatory or optional. These increases are always mandatory. They are not optional, and they are not dependent on anything related to the gain, which I will talk about later in the bill. Other things of note that House Bill 3 did is it repealed the Cost of Education Index, or CEI, and it also changed some things about the TRS contributions for charters and districts of innovation. Now, the reason why the CEI is important is because the CEI serves to adjust the salary schedule, or at least it did in old law. Some resources available to you for the questions about the minimum salary schedule increase you can find on to the administrator address letter, which we published on June 11th. And the bottom of the slide here, you see where this is in statute, as well as what page in the bill these changes occurred. So right here, we have the new minimum salary schedule. Now, in prior law, each district would actually have a different adjusted salary schedule depending on what their CEI looked like as it relates to TRS contributions. Under new law, under House Bill 3, all districts have the same salary schedule for affected employees, and as you can see, it ranges from $33,000 all the way up to $54,000. When you compare it to the previous salary schedule, you can see the increases for each step range from over $5,500 for a new teacher to over $9,000 for a teacher with over 20 years of experience. TRS contributions, what changed? So one of the things that House Bill 3 looked to do is create uniformity in the way TRS contributions were handled above the minimum salary schedule. So I'll show an example in a few slides, but one of the things that it did was for charter schools, for the first time, will now be required to pay the state contribution on a portion of a member's salary that happens to increase the statutory minimum. And so even though charter schools are not subject to the salary schedule, if their members were on it, then the charter school would have to pay the TRS portion above the MSS. Similarly, districts of innovations, which right now can exempt themselves from paying on the minimum salary schedule, the House Bill 3 clarified that they cannot exempt themselves from paying the state contribution for TRS. And again, the associated or the relevant TAA is also published on June 11th. Here's an example. I want to walk you through the math a little bit of what TRS contributions looked like prior to House Bill 3, and in addition, Senate Bill 12, which I'll talk about in the next slide. So what you have here on the left, a traditional school district. In this example, you have a teacher with 0 years of experience making $40,000. Now, this is greater than the prior state minimum for that step of $28,080. Now, when you take the old TRS contribution rate of 6.8%, you have a total contribution of $2,720 all in for that a particular teacher. Now, because that $40,000 is above the $28,080, you had a breakdown between the state paying the 6.8% up to the minimum, and then you had the district taking over the difference. So you had the state paying one portion and the district paying the other portion, and then when you combined, you had a combined $2,720 I see at the very bottom. Now, charter schools and districts of innovation, as you can see, for charter schools anyway, they were not subject to it. So what you had is the state paying the full 6.8% contribution. Now, after House Bill 3 and Senate Bill 12, again, House Bill 3 created uniformity in the way all districts are treated with regards to their payment of the TRS contributions. And Senate Bill 12 is relevant because that actually increased the state contribution from 6.8% to 7.5%. So in this new example, you have the same teacher making $40,000. The new minimum salary is just over $33,000, and now the total combined payment for TRS is $3,000, as you can see at the very bottom of the slide. Now, with the same concept holds true with the state paying up to the new MSS level, $33,660, and then the district or charter school must pay that 7.5% above the difference. So here's one of our most frequently asked questions. Well, actually, we've gotten several different variations of this question. The question is, do districts have to increase salaries up to the minimum salary schedule if, and then fill in the blank, for whatever reason? The answer is yes, unless exempted from the MSS via a Districts of Innovation plan. One thing to keep in mind is that the House Bill 3 did not change any requirement to comply with the MSS. So regardless of how your district fared under House Bill 3 with the amounts of new revenue provided under the bill, the requirement to pay up to the minimum salary schedule remains the same. So here's another one. When are the new salary rates effective? And so based on our understanding, the new salary rates are effective for the 1920 school year. So there's no delay. It takes effect immediately. Even though the state fiscal year goes from September through August, it's my understanding that the first paycheck for any of these impacted employees that reflect the days worked under the new contract should be paid out reflecting the increased rates of pay. And so if you have a teacher that is starting their contract in August and has days of service in August, then their first paycheck, whether that's at the end of August 2019 or the beginning of September 2019, then that paycheck should reflect the increases in the minimum salary schedule. And of course, districts should consult and confirm with TRS when you're making these compensation decisions. In a similar fashion, when you're making your payroll, running your payroll, and you're paying the TRS portion or the local portion of the state contribution, districts want to make sure that the proper paychecks, you're paying the proper percentage on the proper amount above the new minimum salary schedule. So what are some next steps for districts? So of course, all districts have to ensure that they're complying with the new MSS for all relevant employees that are affected under Chapter 21 for the coming school year. And of course, you should confirm with TRS when the appropriate month is to switch to the minimum salary schedule. I know that some teacher contracts begin in September, other teacher contracts begin in July. Again, this might impact how you report and pay these increases. So you want to check with TRS and make sure that you're doing things properly. And again, similarly for charter schools and districts of innovation, you want to make sure that you're remitting the appropriate amounts of TRS contributions on time and with the first paycheck accordingly. The next topic I want to go over is the calculation of the 30% for school districts and charter schools. And if you're not familiar with the 30%, it's a requirement under House Bill 3 that all school districts and charter schools are required to pay 30% of their gain from the bill and pay that towards compensation increases. So what exactly do I mean when I say gain? Well, see, one of the things that what you do is you look at the year-over-year entitlement gain. So you want to look at 2018-19 versus 19-20. When you look at this, you have that 75% of the 30% must be used for compensation increases for classroom teachers, librarians, nurses, and counselors. And then with the bill actually prioritizes differentiated increased compensation for veteran teachers. And by veteran teachers, I mean teachers that are entering their 6th year of teaching. And then the remainder of the 30%, the 25% may be used for other employees except administrators. And there's another letter on the TEA website, also dated June 11th, that helps explain all this as well. So the way it works is the compensation increases are for full-time employees other than administrators. And it applies in any future year when the basic allotment is increased. Now, this doesn't mean that the basic allotment increase, that the 30% is based off of that increase, but rather the increase in the basic allotment acts as a trigger. Now, again, the 75% again must be used for that specific group of employees. And one thing of note that's highlighted here on the slide is benefits such as insurance premiums can count as a part of compensation under the bill. And also please note that the 30% is not a maximum, it's a floor. So districts and charter schools are welcome to give more in terms of compensation. It's just that the 30% is the minimum under the bill. Here is how you would calculate the 30%, or an example. I want to highlight on the right here that, again, the compensation increase amount, you do not calculate that by multiplying the change in the BA by 30%. So the basic allotment increased by roughly $1,000 this year, you would not take 30% of that increase. Rather, it's in years where the BA increased. Those are the years when districts and charter schools must look at giving 30% of the increase towards compensation. Another frequently asked question I've been getting is, do hardship grants from House Bill 21 for 1819 count? Yes, they do. Do formula transition grants from House Bill 3 count? Yes, they do. And as well as available school fund. Available school fund should also be included in the calculation. And so for districts that need help in calculating these amounts, of course, you can use your own internal estimates. You're free to do so. But if you want some TEA guidance or documents to look at, you can look at our summary finances on the TEA state funding website. You would want to look at calculate the 2018-19 M&O funding per ADA. And again, this is on a per ADA basis. You would take your total state aid, you would add in any local M&O tax collections, and you would subtract out recapture. You would then do the same thing for 1920 under Chapter 48. And so right now we don't, the TEA doesn't have any 2019-20 summary finances up yet, but we will be publishing a state funding template in the next week or so. So be on the lookout for that, and that can help you estimate your 1920 revenue under the bill. Once you have those two numbers, you simply take the difference between those two numbers to compute a gain per ADA. Now, if once you have that gain per ADA, you would multiply that against your projected 1920 ADA to get your total gain from the bill, and then that's the number you would multiply by 30%. Now, at this point, one of the most frequent questions I've been getting is how are we supposed to do this, even though we don't have all the information from the bill yet? And that's true. There's several factors or pieces of data that don't exist yet for districts, and so what I've been telling districts is just to give their best estimate and do a good faith effort to just be really accurate in what you're projecting for this gain, and that's the best you can do.
Hi, this is Al McKenzie. I'm joining Leo today, picking up to take you through a few slides going over some of the frequently asked questions that we've got through our HB3 inbox. Joining me also is Ali Friedlander, our Program Manager of Teacher Leadership and Strategic Compensation, and she's going to take us through an example at the end of what a differentiated compensation package might look like for a school district. So one of the first frequently asked questions that we've gotten is, can my district utilize across-the-board pay raises and still meet the 30% requirement? Well, the short answer is no, because the legislation clearly asks for a differentiated compensation package. Although districts are free to decide how that works best for them, there's clearly an expectation that compensation increases for the more experienced teachers would be larger than those for the inexperienced teachers. And a key point in all this is that districts are required under HB3 at the very end of the bill, under section 5.008, to create a report to the legislature documenting each salary increase by the employee's position. The agency will be providing future guidance on this reporting requirement. Another question we've got is, can we increase the number of teaching staff versus increasing the rates of pay for the existing staff and still meet the 30% requirement? So increasing the rates of pay for existing employees is the only way to meet your 30% requirement, while hiring additional teaching staff would result in additional expenditures. It's not considered a compensation rate increase that would count towards your 30% requirement. The next frequently asked question is, can my district utilize one-time stipends to avoid a recurring payroll obligation and still meet the 30% requirement? Once again, the answer is no. There are three things to take into consideration when we consider this question. First is the plain language of HB 3, and the second is the intention of the legislature, which was to provide permanent pay raises, and that's important because, as we've discussed, districts will need to report the salary increases provided to the legislature. And also the provisions of Chapter 21 of the Education Code, which allow the payment of stipends only for supplementary duties. Stipends can't be used to be paid for the delivery of core services, so that would be an inappropriate way to go about the compensation increases. Next one, will there be settle-up on compensation increases provided under the 30%? So we're kind of viewing this similar to the other spending requirements that there are in the foundation school program, for example, for the expenditures on bilingual or CTE, where there's a spending requirement. The statute doesn't differentiate between allocating funds on the basis of budgeted versus actual amounts. So if there were to be some enforcement of the spending requirements, if districts have attempted them in good faith, typically when we have found that districts have not come through with spending requirements on one of the programs like bilingual, it's typically involved curing it in the following year by increasing their expenditures in the following year. The next topic is the interplay of the MSS with the 30% requirement. So House Bill 3 contains two requirements related to compensation. There's both a requirement to abide by the minimum salary schedule, and also to increase salaries by 30% of the gain under HB 3. Districts need to comply with both of these requirements separately. The 30%, as we've discussed, has a differentiated compensation as a requirement, and that would not be addressed solely by complying with the new MSS, so districts would be required to adjust, in addition to going up on the MSS, some differentiation for the experienced teachers. And if a district's gain is negative or zero or a small gain, the district must still comply with the MSS increases. The next page addresses this as kind of a visual for us. The chart on the left is an example of what might happen with a district that had a fairly high salary range before the bill. In this case, the increase on the MSS costs less than what must be spent for the 30% requirement, so the compensation increases occur in addition to the MSS. And then example B on the right, this would be typical of a district which had a salary range that was more aligned to the minimum salary schedule before the bill, in which case you can see that the increase in the MSS for this district would actually be greater than what is required for the 30% requirement. Or if they have a low amount of gain from getting HB3, this would also apply. So the district is going to need to allocate more money than the 30% to abide by the MSS requirements. So this is at the beginning of the example that Ali's going to take you through. In this case, the example is going to assume that the district projects a per ADA increase of $635 coming from HB3 over their 2018-19 FSP funding. The district's projecting an ADA of $3,000 for 2019-20, which means when you do the math that 30% of the budget increase is going to be $571,000. So 75% of that is 428,625. That's going to be the requirement that the district needs to meet in the example where we're taking you through the type of teacher salary increase that would be required. This district has 194 teachers employed. 107 are projected to have more than 5 years experience in 2019-20. They would be considered the senior teachers. And they have another 11 individuals employed as full-time librarians, counselors, or nurses who are also eligible for the minimum salary schedule and to increase it. So over to Allie.
So on this slide, we're going to look at district choices and compensation prior to HB3. And obviously, districts have lots of options and available to them when they think through compensation for their teachers. So the dotted gray line shows the 2018-19 state minimum salary schedule, and the orange line shows the district minimum salary schedule prior to HB3. So clearly you can see here that they were above the state MSS. Here we see the new state minimum salary schedule represented by the solid gray line. So you can see that the district was above the state minimum salary schedule at certain points in time on this graph, but around year 8, you'll see that the district dips below the state required minimum salary. This is one way in which the district has reimagined the compensation for its teachers, represented by the blue line here. So you can see a couple of key points. One, you'll see that the district's new minimum salary schedule for the 19-20 school year is above the state minimum requirements at certain points, and then meets the state minimum requirements at other points on this graph. You'll also see that this district has prioritized differentiated compensation for teachers with for educators that have more than 5 years of experience. So you'll see that little bump around year 5. On the next slide, we're going to take a look at how this district further differentiates its compensation for its veteran educators, for those teachers with more than 5 years of experience. So for teachers that were rated as distinguished on T-test, the district added an additional $500 per year to their salary. So you can see the diverging blue lines show the additional gains that these teachers were able to get because of the compensation connected to their performance rating on the T-test rubric. It's also important to note here that the district does not advance teachers on the local salary step if the teacher's rating needs improvement on the T-test appraisal system. So overall, this would result in an average of $3,738 salary increase per veteran educator, and this would be before the TRS increase. So now we'll kick it back to Leo to close us out.
So next steps, what are we going to do, TEA and the district? TEA, again, we will be gathering questions from this webinar, and then we will be posting our responses at our House Bill 3 website, and you can see the URL on the slide right here. And within the next 2 weeks, hopefully I'm targeting by July 1, we will be posting the school finance Excel template to the website. This should help districts look at their revenue for 1920 and estimate what they're looking at getting, so they can figure out what they're going to apply towards the 30% requirement. And so districts should definitely download the school finance template as soon as it's available. And again, consult all attorneys before making your compensation increases. And here's just some contact information related to House Bill 3. Thanks very much.